The whole world stopped and stared. People from every corner of the planet were glued to their TVs and phones, hearts racing together. It didn't matter where they were from, what language they spoke, or what they believed. Everyone felt connected in that electric moment. The air buzzed with excitement, like the calm before a big storm. A huge crowd, full of all kinds of faces, stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting for something incredible. Then, from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, a new voice rang out. It was Pope Luis Antonio Tagle, the first Asian pope ever. His words weren't just a speech, they were a spark, lighting up the hopes and dreams of millions. He stood there, a symbol of a church stepping boldly into the future, while still holding on to its roots. The crowd went silent, hanging on every word. This wasn't just a hello, it was a game changer, a sign that a fresh chapter for the Catholic Church had begun. You could feel the energy in St. Peter's Square, a mix of awe and joy. Flags waved and people's faces glowed with hope. This wasn't just about the church, though. Around the same time, surprising news from elections in Togo sent ripples across the globe. But all eyes were on this humble man now leading the church. A guy known for living simply, caring deeply for the poor, and tackling big issues with a bold, modern twist. Pope Luis carried the weight of centuries like it was no big deal, with a calm strength and a warm smile that made everyone feel seen. His first big message? One word: inclusivity. He called for a church that welcomes everyone, especially those who've been left out or forgotten. His words painted a picture of a brighter future, where no one gets left behind. This wasn't just a tweak to the rules, it was a wake-up call, a challenge to live with more kindness and courage. The church wasn't just changing, it was coming alive again. Imagine a call to be the real deal, living out love and kindness in a world that's crying out for it. Pope Luis Antonio Tagle didn't just want the church to talk about faith, he wanted it to show it, like hands and feet getting to work for Jesus. He dreamed of a community where people don't just pray for a better world, but roll up their sleeves to make it happen, with fairness and care at the core. His message was bold and straight up. The church needs to shake things up. Forget just handing out help here and there. Poverty's not a puzzle to solve, it's a wrong to wipe out completely. He said faith isn't about fancy words, it's about action. And the church? It's got to lead the charge. He pushed for big moves, like ditching fossil fuels, fighting for the planet, and standing side by side with indigenous people who are hit hardest by climate change. To him, this wasn't just a nice idea. It was a must, a sacred duty to look after the earth God made. But he didn't stop there. The new pope wanted the church to be a home for everyone. No matter who you love or how you identify, he said, "Come on in." Love and understanding should rule the day, not judgment. He believed talking openly could mend old hurts and bring people together, especially those who'd felt pushed away before. For them, this felt like a warm hug, a sign the church was finally tuning in. Inside the Vatican, too, he demanded change. He called for honesty, openness, and a hard look at the tough stuff, like the abuse scandals. He promised to tackle it head-on, to fight for the survivors, and to make sure it never happens again. He heard their pain loud and clear, and swore their voices wouldn't be ignored. This was a pope ready to clean house and rebuild trust, one step at a time. Pope Luis Antonio Tagleo's words hit the world like a thunderbolt, promising to listen to the hurting and heal their wounds with kindness. People everywhere buzzed with a mix of thrilled cheers, nervous jitters, and quiet hope. For progressive Catholics, especially in poorer countries, it was like Christmas morning. Here was a pope who got them, who spoke their language, and who painted a picture of a church that welcomed everyone and fought for fairness. World leaders had their say, too. Some clapped for his gutsy ideas, like the United Nations boss, who called it a wake-up call for all faiths. Leaders from struggling nations cheered him as a hero for the underdog. But back in the Vatican, not everyone was on board. Some old-school cardinals scratched their heads, worried his focus on justice might shake up the Church's classic rules too much. This wasn't a total surprise, though. Pope Tagle, sometimes called Tackling by fans, picked up where Pope Francis left off. Francis, the down-to-earth Jesuit, had already started a wave of change years back, pushing for a church that cared more about mercy than pointing fingers. He saw a world falling apart, unfairness everywhere, a trashed planet, and fading faith, and said, "Enough." He wanted a church that stood with the poor and forgotten. Tagle, a close buddy of Francis, ran with that baton. But Tagle wasn't just a copycat. He brought his own flavor, shaped by his roots in the Philippines, a Catholic hotspot in Southeast Asia. Growing up there, he knew hardship and hope firsthand. His journey to the papacy wasn't a straight line. It was a wild ride that made him a shining light from the East, ready to lead with heart and hustle. Pope Luis Antonio Tagle came from the Philippines, a place that taught him the struggles and dreams of people in the global South, those often overlooked corners of the world. Raised in a tight-knit Catholic family, his faith wasn't just about prayers, it was about fighting for fairness. He saw poverty and injustice up close growing up, and those moments stuck with him, shaping how he'd lead one day. When he became the first Asian pope, it was a game changer, a sign that the heart of the Catholic Church was beating stronger in places like Asia, Africa, and Latin America, not just Europe or North America. Tagle didn't waste time dreaming. He got to work turning the church into a welcoming home for everyone. He wanted it to shine like a lighthouse, guiding people with love, kindness, and justice, no matter who they were or where they came from. Following Jesus' example, he put the poor and pushed aside front and center. He called a big meeting, a synod, with bishops from all over to tackle the big issues: poverty, exclusion, and the planet's health. It was like a global family reunion, with different voices coming together to map out a fresh path for the church. His actions spoke louder than words. He rolled up his sleeves, visiting struggling neighborhoods, planting trees to show the church cared about the earth, and chatting with people who'd been ignored, giving them a boost of hope. Tagle's style was all about keeping things real and open. He loved a good conversation, inviting everyone to share their thoughts, even if they didn't agree. His town hall meetups with regular folks were a hit, letting people speak straight from the heart. And when he sat down with survivors of church abuse, he didn't just nod along. He listened, cared, and promised to make things right. It was a big move to fix old wounds and win back trust, one honest talk at a time. Pope Luis Antonio Tagle wasn't content to just lead Catholics in their own little bubble. He had bigger dreams. He rolled up his sleeves and reached out to leaders from all kinds of faiths, sitting down with them for heartfelt chats about the things that unite people, not the stuff that tears them apart. He pictured a world where folks of different beliefs could get along, where peace and understanding could bloom in places too often tangled up in religious squabbles. To him, faith wasn't a wall to divide, it was a bridge to connect. But not everyone was ready to join the party. His bold ideas rubbed some church folks the wrong way, and they weren't quiet about it. To them, Tagle was shaking things up too much, pushing the church into unfamiliar territory that felt downright wild. His progressive stance sparked heated debates among the faithful, splitting opinions down the middle. Newspapers jumped on the drama, splashing spicy headlines across their front pages, while outside churches, protesters gathered with handmade signs, their voices loud and their faces stern, upset about the changes he was championing. Critics inside the church had plenty to say. They grumbled that Tagle was softening the edges of long-held teachings, especially on heavy topics like abortion and same-sex marriage. They argued he was tinkering with the very heart of what the church stood for, diluting its core values in a way that made them nervous. "This isn't the Catholicism we know," some cried, feeling like the ground beneath their faith was shifting. Others weren't thrilled with how much he focused on fairness and lending a hand to the struggling. They said it pulled the church away from its main gig of spreading the gospel. To them, Tagle's priorities seemed more about fixing the world than saving souls, and that tension stirred up a storm of doubt. Despite the pushback, Tagle didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the prize, a church that could be a force for good, lifting up the downtrodden and standing tall for justice. His vision wasn't just talk. It was a call to action that echoed far beyond the Vatican's walls. But the clash of opinions grew louder. Some saw him as a breath of fresh air, a leader brave enough to rethink old ways. Others saw him as a troublemaker, stirring the pot and threatening traditions they'd clung to for generations. Either way, Pope Tagle had lit a match, and the flames of debate were spreading fast. Still, Pope Luis Antonio Tagle stood his ground like a rock in a storm. He wasn't about to back down, not even a little. His heart was set on turning the church into a powerhouse for good, a place that didn't just talk about kindness, but lived it, fighting tooth and nail for everyone's rights and dignity, no exceptions. He believed the church could be a beacon, shining bright for the overlooked and the outcast, and he wasn't going to let anyone dim that light. To him, this wasn't just a job, it was a mission, a promise to make the world better, one step at a time. But not everyone was buying what he was selling, especially the old guard. The conservative crowd, folks who'd grown up with the church doing things a certain way, watched his every move with narrowed eyes and skeptical frowns. They liked the comfort of tradition, the familiar rhythm of how things had always been, and Tagle's bold vibe. It rattled them. They couldn't quite wrap their heads around his push for justice and inclusivity, especially when it came to opening the church's arms to the LGBTQ community. To them, that felt like a stretch too far, like he was watering down the faith they'd known and loved their whole lives, a faith carved in stone, not meant to bend or shift with the times. And then there was his tree planting and climate talk. Tagle wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, literally, digging into environmental issues and calling for the church to care about the planet. But to the traditionalists, this was a head-scratcher. They saw it as him wading into political waters, splashing around in stuff they thought the church should steer clear of. "This isn't our lane," they'd mutter, shaking their heads. To them, the church's job was spiritual, saving souls, not saving trees, and Tagle's green streak felt like a detour from that sacred path. The divide grew wider every day, splitting the church right down the middle. On one side, you had the pull of tradition, a deep-rooted longing to keep things steady and unchanged, like an anchor holding fast in choppy seas. On the other, there was the push for something new, a fresh wind blowing through, urging the church to evolve and meet the world where it was. Caught between the two, the faithful wrestled with big questions. What's the church supposed to be? Could it hold onto its past while reaching for the future? Tagleo's ideas weren't just stirring the pot, they were shaking the whole kitchen. And no one could quite predict where the pieces would land. Tagleo's time as Pope turned into a big, loud debate: progress versus the past. It forced everyone to think hard about what the Church was, is, and could be in a world that's changing fast. Love him or not, he made waves that couldn't be ignored. Oh, and if you're into this kind of story, hit subscribe on our channel, God Always, for more cool stuff.